Thanks for coming, and I'm very happy to be here. And really excited to talk to these three amazing women who are all involved not only in community gardens specifically, but in thinking about how community gardens can be transformative to communities, neighborhoods, and cities. So today I'm going to ask a series of questions and sort of directed at individuals on the panels and then everyone on the panel may also jump in on all the questions. And so let me just, so there are 4 questions, and then we'll turn to the audience for your questions at the end. So let me just jump in with my first question. And Naomi, I'm going to ask you to address this question first. How do community gardens support the food traditions of Southside gardeners? What practices emerge in a community when we keep space for intergenerational cultural knowledge?
Thank you, and hey everybody. Nice to be out in the public again, right? Well, I love that question because those of you who have never been around me before have not heard me introduce myself the way I often do, which is, I'm Naomi Davis, and I come from white gloves and mud. The proud granddaughter of Mississippi sharecroppers who, like millions of others, voted with their feet and moved up south for freedom and economic opportunity. Yes, my sister, okay? And in that context, we understand the waves of movement and the waves of heritage that come with it. Some time ago, I think it was 2017, I did a series for the Chicago Public Library called The Suitcase. And it was this fictionalized story of a woman who came up on one of the trains, the IC, during the Great Migration. And with her, she had this iconic suitcase. And in the suitcase, among other family treasures, were seeds from the garden back home. And we talked about those staples of the garden. My mother moved to New York City in the Great Migration, and so we were in one of those nice little Black middle-income communities where, you know, all the lawns were cut and all the kids were college-bound, et cetera, et cetera. So how she expressed her farming traditions was through becoming a master gardener. And we always had growing things, and we always had fresh vegetables to eat, and we always had some sort of system for recycling things, like the compost bin, et cetera, out back behind the garage, that mysterious place that was like, what's all that stuff back there? And of course, I was one of those kids, like many, many of us, who was making mud pies and eating them. So we just had a very life-filled house. But now here we are, fast forward to the age of climate crisis. And for those of you who don't know about Blacks in Green, we work at the intersection of environment and economy. And for us, that means, you know, we are making sure we're building wealth as we're building health through ownership of the businesses, ownership of the land, and what we call living the conservation lifestyle. So for us, the idea that there is a very natural phenomenon of intergenerational gardening that has broken its strings in urban neighborhoods for the most part. And our ability as community gardeners is the opportunity to connect people. At Blacks in Green, we do gardening and gardening education from basically cradle to grave. So we have a little nursery school program, and that's what we call it, the nursery school. Get it? where babies learn to grow plants. And we have a lovely partnership with Hello Baby, one of our neighbors and donors. And in that context, we have a Orchard of the Ancestors right across the street from Hello Baby. And Hello Baby has put a fairy garden inside of the orchard. We've got 40 fruit and nut trees in our orchard that we planted back in 2015. And so the babies go there and they play and they learn and they get curriculum. Nancy! And then we also, just a few blocks away, have a senior victory garden at one of the senior homes. And we manage and inspire, sometimes educate, this idea that we are also one of the organizations that have done summer youth employment for many years. Getting those groups together out of those silos isn't the easiest thing in the world, because as anyone up here will tell you, the garden doesn't care how tired you are. When it wants to be watered, when it wants to be weeded, that's what's supposed to happen. And so people are busy, they're stressed, they are sometimes put off by what they call that slavery stuff. I ain't doing none of that slavery stuff. Because there is shame and trauma associated with getting out there in the weeds and in the sun and doing stuff, and usually for free, all right? And so the idea that we have, and we were talking about this earlier when we were understanding some of the waves of popularity around community gardens. It has moved, and we were able to distinguish, and maybe Robin and Diane will say a little bit more about that, but we were able to distinguish the waves of popularity of gardens, how they ebb and flow. And in my case, I was looking at how is it that we're gonna deal with life when the truck don't come? When the truck don't come. We saw a little bit about the truck don't come last year, didn't we? And everybody was panicking and running in the stores and sometimes being unkind to each other because they were gonna get that last whatever it was, right? Okay. The idea that is so natural that we should grow what we eat, some portion of it that we can, because there's so little space that's needed to grow a really bountiful harvest. And are we not oriented? Are we not educated? Are we not activated to actually pull some space together and some seeds? And so the idea for Blacks in Green is that the Sustainable Square Mile is a place where you can walk to work, walk to shop, walk to learn, and walk to play, but that you are definitely going to keep a growing space on your kitchen shelf, in your backyard, on your deck, or in your community working together with others. And we maintain the 16 Great Migration Gardens of West Woodlawn as a place where those silos can be broken and people can come together, such as at our Mamie Till Forgiveness Garden and our Orchard of the Ancestors and our Sustainability Teaching Garden. So come on over to West Woodlawn sometime, walk around, and get dirty with us.
Wow, thank you for that totally publishable response. That was beautiful. You covered that question in so many ways. And does anyone want to jump in and say anything about that idea of intergenerational knowledge before we move on?
I did want to talk just briefly. I know we have lots to cover today, but I wanted to put into context, first off, why one of the reasons I'm sitting here talking to you all is because I work for the organization Neighbor Space, which is an urban land trust in Chicago. And in that regards, we help support and steward leadership across the city for 130 different gardens, one of which Diane is a lovely garden leader, and Molly is a lovely garden leader. So in a interesting way, there's a map across the city of community effort. And within that map of community effort, there are things that are being shared to the point we just heard. People are growing things they used to grow. There's a history of information and plants and seeds being passed down. In the same regards, though, there's also waves of new things that are happening. And one of the surprising things that I think that happened in one of our Austin collective garden spaces was there was a set of community leaders who were hosting a farmer's market and bringing in fresh fruits and vegetables and food. And the thing that flew off the shelves faster than anything else was cut flowers. And there was something about the need for beauty in this particular moment that was letting this moment replicate itself through what choices people were making. And that happens over and over across the city in different ways. But being open to understanding these desires change. 30 years ago, there was groups of people who had a deep history of gardening because they had migrated from the South. And many of those people have died and are not hosting and leading in the same way that they used to. So adapting to the new conditions that we all live in, where most people are inside a lot, how do we get people back outside again without them having to re-experience trauma that they carry historically with them? And one thing is to recognize that people of different economic levels have different levels of free time. And it's really, really important to recognize that folks in areas where they're working 40 to 60 to 80 hours a week, there is a desire not to come and maintain something and clean something, but there is a desire to come and be with their people and represent themselves and be in community with others. So how, as a larger group, can we set the opportunities for people to experience and enjoy outdoor nature spaces and outdoor growing spaces without feeling shame that they don't have the free time to manage or care for these spaces? So it's a really important thing, I think, to the point of being able to eat mud and make mud pies. Those experiences of knowing how to connect to a deep sense of play and nature and knowing that the world is your own is really important to make sure you have those opportunities for young kids, so that they do get a chance to come back and have a sense of stewardship, a shared sense of stewardship as adults. So there's all sorts of opportunities. I know we don't have enough time to talk about every single action that you can do, but keeping all of these sort of ideas and interrogating, why do people come out? Why do people come out in different ways? Why aren't they coming out? Let's make sure we keep on asking those questions and keep inviting people. One thing I hear more than I hear, one complaint I hear more than others is, oh, I don't have enough support. Community members aren't coming out. I want them to come out, but they're not coming out. And then from the community members you hear, I don't feel invited. It doesn't feel like a space for me. I don't know how to get involved. I don't have time. So what can we do to make those situations work together and recognize both of them is really important.
Thanks, Robin. I think this idea of how do you make the world your own is so important. I really liked that idea. I want to turn to another question that I'd like to pose to Diane. Thinking about South Merrell Community Garden, could you talk about some of the specific benefits community gardens provide for gardeners and community members, and why community gardens are important for healthy neighborhoods and communities, especially on the South Side?
Well, one of the first things that I understood about any garden or plant is that nature nurtures. And that's very important. So whether you're eating the herb, or whether you're looking at a flower or a plant, there's a sense of healing taking place. Also, soil has its own antidepressant. So people who work in gardens can experience a calming effect. It will last like 2 or 3 days. So sometimes you wonder why you're feeling so good after you work in your garden. Well, that's one of the reasons. But when you're looking at community gardens, especially in spaces that might be prone to chaos, the garden can become an anchor. And so we know that plants are communicative. We know that plants carry high frequencies. And so when you go into that garden and you begin to tend to that garden, the communication with the plant is, we are so grateful that you're in here helping us. We're going to help you. So ultimately, the energy of the garden begins to extend out. So when you're in an area that's prone to shootings and drug activity, what might happen is those type of people may not come into your garden, but there's a sense of respect and there's a submission to what they're doing, and they tend to keep it away from your area because they do understand that you're attempting to bring some type of harmony and balance to their community. Now, our garden has gone through several stages. As the two presenters were saying, you have the ebbs and the flow. But what you have to do is you have to keep a focus on, how can I bring younger people in? How can I get them trained? How can I generate money so that I can at least give them stipends so they don't feel like slaves working in these gardens? And how can I get them to possibly duplicate themselves so we don't have these trends where we lose a garden for 4 or 5 years and people have to start over again. One of my favorite mantras that I've begun to say every day in meditation is care, concern, action, and no excuses. So we give away food, but we also create an aesthetic environment so that when people come into the garden, they can see something beautiful. We have crackheads, druggies that come past. They're not going to come in their garden, but they look in, and they'll say things like, oh, that's beautiful. That's part of a healing process for them for maybe 3 minutes that day. That takes their mind off of the fact that they're looking for their next drug fix. The other thing we do is providing intergenerational programming for the youth and for the older people in a safe space. We had to put cameras in our garden. Yeah, we had to do that, but we want people to feel safe. So our garden has a team of people. Some of them live on the block. Most of them do not live on the block, but they live in the area. We even get people from the suburbs sometimes, but it's just people with a passion to help us. And I have to say, without neighbor space, we couldn't do this. And neighbor space supports us because they have seen such a transition. It's transformative, it transmits, it transmutes an energy that's coming from a space of unconditional love. So as we move forward, we need to understand with climate change, well, if we can't get food transported to us in the winter, what are we gonna do? So here comes ownership, as Naomi said. So I'm a shareholder in a cooperative. So we have the ability to take a unit and turn it into a community room where we do seedlings, but also I donated a hydroponic system. So we want to start teaching people hydroponics. We want grants where we can possibly put smaller vertical towers in their homes where them and their children can have green food all year round. It's all about education. But last week we had an event where children were actually harvesting themselves and they were eating the food like right there. It has taken us 4 years to get to that point where we could get children that would be interested like that. Our other project this year is Arts on the Rocks on Merrill. So we have all these rocks that were put in by the Chicago Botanical Garden, which is another whole story about a young boy who was murdered through gang violence, and the garden had been dedicated to him. But it's allowing people to come into the garden and leave their footprint. They're painting the rocks, they're designing the rocks, and they can say, I have ownership in this space. Because oftentimes people see gardens and they feel like it's not part of them. So it's the teamwork, it's the effort, it's the people like, where's Vita? I have Vita. Vita is our marketing person, our media person. We have Heather back there. Heather taught herself rock painting. I said, hey, we're going to get her all the supplies. Teach yourself rock painting, and then you're going to teach others. And she's beautiful at it. And in finding that out, we found out she does graphics, so we pay her to do our flyers. We have to create ways for people to make money. She's artistic. She loves gardening. We want her to be a master gardener, so we want to pay to have that done. These are the type of things that empower people. She may have continued to still be out there trying to be in corporate America, but maybe that's not for her. Maybe she should be in the whole gardening realm. And then we have Ayana over here. Raise your hand, Ayana. Ayana was the team leader for 3 years, 4 years? She got burned out.
You didn't have to say that.
Well, to be quite honest with you, there comes a time when you have gone as far as you can go, and you know that there are more appropriate people to take your space. So as a mature individual, I said, I can continue going, but let me step aside and give another person an opportunity to take that next step. Diane, you have done beautiful. Amazing.
So I didn't want to do it. But when she stepped down, I was like, oh, damn, somebody got to step up. But I've grown. Every day I'm out of my comfort zone, every freaking day. But you know what? What are we on the planet to do? If you can't figure out what you came here to do, what I found out is that so many things that I went through in my lifetime that was so abusive and made me have to survive, it actually has built me where I could do this.
The garden will do that, won't it?
It will.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, so
So we have a cooperative that we have saved. Now we have a garden. We can pull those resources together, and we can use our cooperative unit spaces to extend our garden experience during the rest of the year.
Amen.
yeah, that's amazing. Wow. Yeah, as a garden leader, I have to say that I am amazed by the things you do in your garden. It's not easy to do what you're doing. That's all I'm going to say about that. But I bow to you all. Okay, well, thanks so much, Diane. That's incredible. All these projects that you're doing, and that you're building, from small to large through the garden. I want to turn to our third question, and I'm going to shoot this question at Robin first. So the third question is, we're at the site of a historic community garden, a victory garden founded during World War II when U.S. citizens were asked to assist in the war effort by growing a portion of their own food. How do community gardens continue to assist us in times of crisis?
So when I was thinking about this question, one thing that many of you probably are aware of, but is good to remember altogether, is that there is a history of gardens becoming places where emergency response actions kind of cluster around community garden projects. So there were projects in the 1900s after World War I, during World War I. There were projects during World War II where there was an active movement to bring people into community garden spaces. And in those two wars, most of it was around trying to augment food production and come together and have food for the communities when some of the distribution patterns were altered. Here we are again in a moment of crisis where there is a natural instinct to all come together again around food security, food crisis, to Naomi's point of what are we going to do when the truck doesn't come? Don't come. What are we going to do when the truck doesn't come? But there is also a question of what are we going to do when the truck does come? Because within some of the food security movements, The trucks are coming with food. There just isn't the capacity to redistribute those food to where it goes. And so many people have told me, and it's not healthy. It's not getting distributed in an efficient way. So one kind of response that this moment has an opportunity to give us is how to respond with having food security. How do we know how to grow so that when the truck doesn't come, we know what to do? But number two, how do we be ready for when food does come to us? How to be ready for food, for not only needing access to food, but needing access to community capacity. And I think that's one area in which over the last 100 years, the garden has represented a certain kind of capacity, and we haven't evolved into the next growth pattern. So I think if you look at the history of community gardens over the last 100 years, you will also notice that they rise and then they fall, and then they rise and then they fall. And then something happens and there's an emergency response, and then it goes back down again. And what can we do as a community when we recognize that things will rise and they'll fall, and then we'll have to work kind of hard to get things back up again? Are we asking ourselves the right questions when we're in those moments? Is food capacity just the one thing that we're trying to maintain, or are we actually trying to have a response that's not completely emergency crisis response, and maybe have a longer-term sustainable maintenance response, so that we are not constantly reteaching ourselves how to grow, reteaching ourselves how to connect with our neighbors? 100 years ago, the conditions of where we were in were very, very different than where we are now. They're to the point of folks not knowing how to plant. Many of the seniors and elders that were very, very acutely, technically able to plant are not around in as big of an amount as they used to be. But the other thing is that folks are inside, and they're not going outside. And the types of curiosity that happen are types of curiosity that I think I've heard recently is it's like emergency curiosity. I need to figure this out. I need to know how to grow something. I need to be able to respond quickly to an emergency response. There's another type of curiosity that is a learning curiosity, that the goal is that you're constantly in a situation where you're connecting with the natural world, you're connecting with the things that are available to you, and you don't see an end. And I think there's something to be said about having situations where we're thinking a lot about infrastructure right now and how that applies to community gardens, and how we want to get something fixed, and then we want that fixing to be done. And both in a physical setting and also in a cultural setting, we're not going to fix. Nothing's ever going to be fixed. We are constantly going to be in a position of maintaining and maintaining and maintaining. And how do we orientate ourselves towards this idea that we're constantly maintaining, and that there's something beautiful and innovative and lovely, and we don't just have to do new projects, we can maintain, and that itself can be a new project. And I think that when we locate ourselves in that kind of context, we won't have the rise of emergency food gardens and the fall of emergency food gardens. Those are things we really need to keep in mind.
Thanks, Robin. I want to just ask you briefly to expand on one part of that question. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the institutions or organizations or things that happened in the city in the past that actually helped to maintain community gardens, green spaces, the environment in the city?
Yeah, so today, earlier, when we were in the green room, we were having a conversation about, being able to track the rise and fall of community garden movements, not only across the country, but specifically in the city of Chicago. So another rise and fall of community gardens was in the 70s. Another rise and fall was in the 90s. And if you actually look into the sort of historical institutions that were connected to the community gardening movement, in the 90s, there was a group that still exists. It's called Green Corps. But at the time in the 90s, Green Corps had as one of its main initiatives to construct community gardens and help the communities maintain them. And in the early 2000s, that Green Corps did not go away, but the mission of serving community gardens did. And one of the things that ended up happening was a lot of those community gardens went orphan, that's what I like to call community gardens that don't have a leader. And so NeighborSpace is in a position as a land trust to go back and look at many of those spaces and revigorate and re-identify community leadership. But not only re-identify community leadership in this context now, but re-identify community leadership in the context of making sure that community leaders know what they are getting into and that they may go for 4 years, and that it's very, very healthy to constantly be thinking about how you're changing and maintaining. And leadership transition is not a failure. It's a wonderful, wonderful creative opportunity. So I think we can do a better job of talking about why community gardens are important. And one thing is to continue talking about food security, but also really importantly talk about community security.
Okay, thanks so much, Robin. Our final question before the Q&A is really for all of you. So if each of you could speak for a couple minutes about this last question. So the question is, how do community gardens fit into a holistic vision of the city of the future? Do you see gardens as an aspect of fair housing, environmental justice, climate justice, or anything else?
Yeah, I would love to speak to that first, which is to say that Blacks in Green was founded in order to advance this idea of self-sustaining Black communities everywhere. So what does that mean, self-sustaining? So baked into our business model and the way we engage community, and our pilot community is the community where we live and work, is this idea of a horticultural economy, a horticultural economy. Can you, and in West Woodlawn, where we're located, we have a rubric or a paradigm we call the West Woodlawn Botanic Garden Village Farm and Arboretum. And so we've planted over 300 trees in our walkable village. We have 4 questions that we ask and answer. How many households can we feed? How many neighbors can we train and engage? How many jobs and businesses can we create? And how many gallons of stormwater can we divert? And so we're designed to be in the infrastructure woven into the fabric of the operating system of a community, not some add-on thing that it's nice to do when you get around to it. And in that context, we're so happy to report that we have a worker-owned cooperative that we're building to do this, to anchor this work in the community. It's called Big Botanic Gardens and Farms. And we just graduated our first cohort of 10 neighbors who were learning the spectrum from the global context down to what's in that soil over there, you know? And the idea that they're out today, as a matter of fact, out in the neighborhood as part of that infrastructure, talking to neighbors, going door to door, flyering, inviting, and having little teach-ins as part of the fabric of life of a place. And trust me, with the climate crisis, you're going to want to have an infrastructure, a system, an operating system right where you live. Like we're talking about up here. Doesn't matter what you don't have. You've got enough of the right stuff, the necessary stuff to operationalize.
Yeah, being a cooperative and being on a block that's predominantly apartment buildings. We have a few condo buildings left on the block, but of course that crash we had, a lot of people fled. So neighbor space is a partner that kind of helps, like Robin was saying, people will leave. Well, when we looked at that space and saw that it was, you know, in a place of neglect, I called neighbor space. And then they helped me understand that Ayanna had been attempting to take care of that space. So we came in to help. But when you're in a space where you're surrounded by apartment buildings and you have people coming and going all the time, you don't necessarily get people that even want to be engaged. So how do you deal with that? You continue to focus on attempting to have legacy. Our garden has the program because the programming is the education model that helps them see people every day in that garden smiling at them and inviting them in. So for us, it's a visionary aspect and an intuitive aspect that we know something that they don't have a clue about. But as we continue to educate and live in that area in unconditional love, we're there for them. And I believe that we will last. I believe that this time the legacy will hold, because I believe that people like Alexi and Heather and the Ayanas and the Vitas that understand we cannot continue to start over. And so we will attract the people, the energy, and the resources that we require in order to make this a lasting vision.
Thanks, Diane. I was going to add just 2 quick points. Diane, you were talking about how you're surrounded by apartment buildings, and I think that many times when you're surrounded by apartment buildings, you're surrounded by people who are renting. And there's a history of renters not having a public space that is collectively owned. Many of us rent, I rent, and knowing that there's spaces in communities that I can claim as part of my community and know that that's mine, even if I can't afford to own a building, or if my situation means that I'm more mobile than others. And it's really important that we figure out what that means in terms of people do move, but they also have an opportunity to invest for shorter periods of time, and how do we set the conditions for that. I would also say, just on a nitty-gritty level, in terms of policy, and I know, Naomi, you work a lot in water policy. I work a lot in water policy this year because I'm helping many community gardens get access to fire hydrant water. And if anybody out there has been a part of that, anybody raise your hand. I just want to see if anybody has been experiencing hydrant challenges. Okay. Yeah. So one of the really interesting things about working in community garden spaces across the city is that many community gardens have been able to access hydrant water through the public community fire hydrants. And within the last couple of years, there's been some radical shifts in the ways in which the water department has allowed that process to happen. And one of the very, very challenging thing this year is that to be able to get a permit, you kind of need to be able to jump through many, many bureaucratic hoops. And as a the sort of hidden gem in that story is that jumping through bureaucratic hoops helps you understand deep water policy, deep city policy. It gives you a taste of how the city works. And that's so important as a community, that we know how our city works on a really, really important level. So I don't want to offer up this water challenge as just a thing that was very, very challenging, but it was also something that had within it some very interesting opportunities for us to think about policy different.
Thanks so much, all three of you. So I really enjoyed your responses to that last question, thinking about the future, because you've talked about housing, about climate justice, about walkable cities, about creating cooperative communities, and about understanding your city enough so that you can figure out ways to do all of those things, to do some of those things. Thanks a lot. And
Can I just say one other thing, though?
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to go back to the economy component, because their food systems and hubs that are activated are actually not only gonna keep us alive and healthy, but the gleaming aisles of the supermarket are what is killing us. You do know that, the processed food, et cetera. So being able to activate a horticultural economy is just really fundamental. Like we're about to open our second storefront, not this year, but next year. Our plan is where the flowers, you can get your cut flowers, we grew from seed for the first time this year. And tomorrow we're gonna be giving out our veggies to neighbors, just to kind of get them acclimated to the idea of, God got this. It's like if you ever saw a little seed grow, it's the most magnificent thing in the world. And so, but the jobs that go with that. So a nursery, a landscaping service, a garden supply, and a gift cafe. That's what we're opening on Cottage Grove. And it's gonna hit all those nerve centers that people want and need who live in the community, not the least of which is a place where they can walk to work. Had to say that.
That's awesome. Thank you. I think those things are also important, and thinking about the food economy, is really key here.
May I say
I wanna.
something? Can I say one
sure.
thing? We give away food. The other day, Heather created food bags, and she hung them on the gate, and she did a Facebook post. She was like, you can just come by and get the bag. They were all gone except for one by the end of the day. So even though people may not visit the garden, they appreciate the ability of getting food. And I had an older gentleman come by on a walker, and I remember last year I picked some collards for him. And that man told me, thank you so much, because collards are so expensive these days. That never crossed my mind, but he's right. I'm 72. I remember you get a whole bag of collard greens for $1. And now you go in the store and they'll give you 3 leaves, like for $2.99. It's ridiculous.
True. All right. I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions of the panelists now. So please let us know. If you have a hand up, someone will come around with a microphone.
Test.
Hi, I am really delighted to be here, and I got a question or an observation that I would like to have you all speak to. One is that the thing that Diane was talking about is very, very connected to the idea that she has a magnificent public relations and marketing strategy that has started to involve the community in ways that are just marvelous. The kids come by. Did you talk about them painting the rocks? Good, because I think that that's the key, that anybody who is going to talk about starting a garden in the urban area where you're talking about people who are not connected to and don't have their own experiences. I think that a very strong marketing, like you say, where they go to the Facebook page and where they go to look at what you're doing, and gradually that will put them in. So I'd like you to if you have not already talked about that, talk about your strategies for the marketing.
Well, one of the strategies we have is that being seen and being visible, it also allows us to see what's going on. So when brokers would come on the block to sell buildings over and over again to slum landlords, by us being out there gardening, we would walk up and be like, so what are you here for? And they were, oh, do you live in the city? Oh, no, we're from California. You looking to invest? Oh, yeah. I was like, well, if you're planning on being a slum landlord on this block, that's not going to work. So I told the broker, find us some people that want to invest that can respect our block and our community. So the last people he sold this large building that has been a known drug portal for almost 20 years, they actually did a Zoom meeting with us. And I said, you got a camera up, you got a light up, you need more scavenger services, you need more dumpsters because your building is full of nasty drug people. So they've been working to change things, and now they're working with us, and they know other owners on the block. So now another building was purchased, and that person has came to us and said they want to support what we're doing and came with money. So the focus now is how many owners can we get to not only support what we're doing, because my position to them is, we're increasing our property value. Are you on board? Because if you're not on board, you're gonna have to go.
So, the other question has been for Naomi, and that is that wonderful, long-standing work that you've been doing in this arena. To what extent are you connecting it, if at all, to the education piece? That you could grow 400 pounds of vegetables in your own backyard, for example. How it's connected to health, to food as medicine. To what extent are you trying to spread that to the formal education system?
Wow, that's deep. First of all, Jeanette, I love you. Second of all, we're launching this on October 1st. We're launching our Green Economy Academy. And as part of the curriculum there, we will be continuing a horticultural track. We'll be introducing a community organizing track. And right now, as I mentioned, we just graduated our very first cohort of landscapers and land stewards. It was deep. But as part of that, it's not just like, okay, pick up your shovels and get on out there, guys. And these are not just young people. This is an intergenerational group, family age and older and younger. But it's also Monday morning masterclass. They work Saturdays, Sundays, and Mondays. And every Monday for an hour and a half, we bring in the elite, skilled, proven leaders in every aspect of this work. And they get down, whether it's soil science or whether it's climate crisis, or whether it's get a PhD in this area and discover the world, bring the world to your neighborhood. We are looking at how to just do a deep, enriching curriculum. This fall, we're introducing a curriculum on cooperative business management, retail garden operations, and business planning, because we are looking at, and I tell the team, I don't want no people who just looking for a job. Although looking for a job is a fine thing. I'm looking for owners. I'm looking for owners. And the wealth that you can, who's trying to knock on your door and try to make sure you grow your wealth? And so, we are learning as we go, but we are in for a penny, in for a pound, and we absolutely believe in our theory of change that we can grow health and wealth, and I'll die trying. At the Green Living Room, 6431/33 South Cottage Grove, and expanding.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions in the audience, from the audience? There's a couple questions over here.
Saw yours first.
Hi. So I'm wondering, with the 2 community gardens, or the 16 in West Woodlawn, and then one, the Merrill, what's the model? Are they, so it's, do people come and have individual plots? Or is it the community growing, all together? And what are the pros and cons of the different models?
Well, first of all, we don't have 16 yet. We started in 2015 with this idea of the 16 Great Migration Gardens of West Woodlawn, because 2016 was the centennial of the Great Migration, which began in 1916. So our model was to design 16 different gardens that would celebrate 16 different luminaries from the neighborhood. So each garden being named after one of these luminaries. and lifting up a different aspect of life that luminary lifted up. So, for example, with our Mamie Till Forgiveness Garden, our approach there was to bring in a coterie of experts. This is not something that we had done before, to help us design the garden for generating a specific kind. It's designed to be a garden where you come and sit and reflect and meditate with aromatics, medicinals, and herbals, and with these rolling mounds, which have been so hard. It's been so hard. And just really hideous for a lot of years, but that's the thing about community, because we do have a garden club that we've cultivated in the neighborhood, and they don't, they come out when they come out. So our model is not designed to be dependent on neighbor participation. It's designed to be designed and maintained by our internal staff. So what we're looking to do, again, this is that jobs component. Can we get a coterie of neighbors, because we do recruit from the neighborhood, to be the land stewards and managers? And so, so that's one approach. Some of our gardens are feature food production. Some of them are just designed to be decorative. And we have used in the past and continue to use the summer youth employment programs, which help us get kids from around the city into these spaces. And we have a chief gardening officer who's been on with us since our very beginning of our first garden in 2013. So he's someone who he's someone who can draw the garden. He's an Art Institute graduate. He can specify it, buy it, maintain it, install it, train people to do it. And so he's like our godfather, our educational godfather, who helps us oversee the quality of the botanical spectrum. And then there is the business model associated with sponsorships and corporate donations. So we have a series of landscaping companies who regularly donate plant material, may donate a day of labor. We work closely with Morton Arboretum. They've donated hundreds of trees to us over the years. So it's a mixed bag.
And I just wanted to say, NeighborSpace is a little bit of a different model, since there's 130 sites across the city, and each of those have a community management model. So, for instance, Molly's model at Howard Area Community Garden is mostly allotment, I would say. And that Diane's model is more of a multi-community approach. But we have models all across the city that are very, very different. So I guess that's my answer.
And the models really make a difference, because there is a garden, the Crandon Garden, which is at 71st in Crandon. They sit on a corner, and the entire block is residential. And they rent the boxes out. And so it's sort of kind of privatized, even though they are okay with engaging. But if you're renting boxes, it privatizes it a little bit. Whereas for us, we have to keep it open, because you're in an area where you're attempting to bring stability, some harmony to the area, and you're trying to teach. So for us, people that engage in our garden, we're in a position to send them to Naomi to get more training and to possibly get employment. For us, we do more stipends just to have attraction and encourage people to have a desire to come into the garden.
Okay, thanks so much. We have room for one more question, I think, here.
Okay,
So.
I'll make it short. We've used the word community over and over again here, and that's a very seductive word. It makes us all feel very good, okay? But humans live in metaphor, and their metaphors are shaped by the environment they live in. The work you do in your garden, the work in your neighborhood, and so on eventually shapes how you speak and how you think about yourself. So community also works to isolate us. Community can also work in them and us. So my question is, trying to remember that, trying to keep that focused, what do your organizations do to cross those boundaries, to make that a larger metaphor that includes more people, more communities? This is not an easy thing. They will hear what you say differently because they live in a different space. Hard work.
I see community, the word means to commune as one. And from a cellular perspective, we as human beings are trillions of cells, and those cells come together and they create organs, and then they create systems, and they function together. I look at our garden as a cell, and this cell is being nurtured by us, and it begins to develop and spread out, and then other people come in and become part of it. And we can't control how people are going to come in or what they're going to do. We can only work with the people that are attracted to our energy to be part of that cellular complex that we are creating.
Can I use your? Oh, wait, there we go. So we've noticed that a lot of people come into community gardening settings with a sort of a fantasy narrative in their head about what a community garden is. And that very fantasy image of what a community garden is and that narrative ends up trickling into philanthropy and trickling into ways in which people participate in community gardens, and ends up oftentimes driving money into sometimes the wrong projects, and also driving community people who come together away from the community project they had chosen. So some of the work that you're talking about is really maybe making sure that people understand we don't have a lot of practice as a culture coming together in community spaces, and when because of that we don't have some of the skills that need to be muscle memories. We don't have the skills that when we come into a space and there's conflict, conflict about what one person thinks is pretty and what one person thinks is healthy and what one person thinks is the right soil method and what one person thinks is the right way to invite neighbors in. When all of those are in conflict with each other, we try to say that is what community is. You are going to find yourself in a situation where you are going to work harder than others. You're going to find yourself in a situation where people don't feel invited to your space. You're going to find yourself in a situation where tomatoes are stolen and you're still going to want to keep on growing your tomatoes. And you're going to find yourself in a moment of feeling discouraged, and that is actually the opportunity to feel like you're part of something. Because we don't have very many phrases or a common vocabulary for that, that's one of our ongoing goals, is to continually sort of make meaningful and professionalize that ability to be in community space with multiple different types of people with different experiences, and have the tools to not be seduced by some fantasy that will ultimately end up killing the dream.
And you always have to do personal development on yourself.
And I would answer that question because the word that really captured, the word that I captured in your question was isolation. And I see it because we're door-to-door people. So, it's like when we talk about the walkable village, I want to distinguish that you could be on your bike, you can drive through the neighborhood, and you can do this every day for the rest of your life, and you will not experience community really until you get out and walk it. It's good exercise, blah, blah, blah. But when you go it's like the feelings you have when you go to knock on someone's door. What are you feeling? And then when someone either talks through the door or opens the door, what are they feeling? What's getting created in that moment? What I know is that we're afraid, we're protecting, we're not really trusting that a good outcome is going to happen from talking to someone I don't know. All right. And so what two approaches for us. Three really. Number one is door to door, on a regular basis. Number two is we're infrastructure people, so we believe we've created a system of 9 zones in our walkable village. So the purpose of those 9 zones is and what we just introduced this year is, training our horticultural cohort to own one of the zones and to make that zone their own in terms of knowing who's there and building those relationships. Relational. And then the third thing I'll say is just rinse and repeat. Because you're gonna bomb out, people are not gonna respond, they're going to run away or they're gonna talk about you, and all of the things that Robin has referred to, the things that Diane has experienced, all of that's gonna happen. But you can get there, and you certainly won't get there from quitting. But if you just keep knocking and keep walking and keep saying hello and keep inviting, and that machinery of marketing does help, but walking that block, that's our manna.
Thank you so much, and thanks for all the questions. We're going to have to we're going to wrap up this panel now and let everyone get on to their other activities. I want to extend my thanks to the panel for all your thoughtful responses and for being with us here today.